8 times, maybe 10. That is how often a medieval woman rolled the dice that a modern mother faces once, perhaps twice in a whole lifetime, and every single throw of them could be her last. Picture that honestly for a moment. Not one night of fear and hope, but 8 of them, 10 of them, across 20 years of a single woman's life, each one a door she had to walk through without knowing whether she would ever walk back out. This is the story of what it was actually like to give birth in the Middle Ages, and it is almost nothing like the story you have been handed. So come closer, because the room you are about to enter is dark on purpose. Before we step through that door, let me make you one promise, and hold on to it for the whole of this. At the very end, I am going to tell you something that ought to be impossible. For 400 years after this dark little room, giving birth with a real, trained, learnt doctor at your side was not safer than what you are about to witness. It was deadlier, far deadlier. Keep that in the back of your mind, because everything you are about to see will make that final turn land all the harder. Let me set you down properly first. The year is somewhere around 1350. You live in England, or perhaps across the water in northern France, in a village of timber and thatch or a crowded town of narrow streets, and you are near your time. For weeks the women around you have been watching, counting, preparing, and now the pains have come in earnest, and a particular kind of quiet has settled over the house. The men are being sent away. This is the first thing that would strike a modern eye, and it matters more than almost anything else you will learn today. There is no doctor here. There will be no doctor here. In your world, the bedchamber of a birth is a room for women, and only women. A man crossing that threshold would be a scandal, a thing that simply is not done. Your husband, your father, your brothers wait elsewhere in the house or out in the yard, useless and anxious, listening. And so we step into a space that half the human race, for most of its history, was never allowed to see. Look around you. The chamber has been made ready with deliberate care. The shutters are closed, any cracks around the window stopped up with cloth. What little light there is comes from the low red glow of the fire and a single tallow candle, and the air is warm, close, heavy with wood smoke and herbs and clean linen. This darkness is not neglect, it is treatment. In the medicine of your age, a birth is a moment when the body is dangerously open, and bright light, cold draughts, sudden noise are all thought to threaten mother and child alike. So the room is sealed and softened into a kind of warm cave, and every woman who enters lowers her voice. This sealed, shadowed room even has a name that historians borrow from a later age, the lying in, and in the middle of it, moving with a calm that steadies everyone, is the one figure this entire day turns upon, the midwife. Understand who she is, because she is nothing like what the word might suggest now. She has never opened a medical book. Almost certainly she cannot read one. She holds no degree, sat no examination in any university, for the great schools of medicine will not so much as let a woman through their doors. And yet her authority in this room is total, and it is earned. Everything she knows through her hands. She learnt it at the elbow of an older midwife, then at bedside after bedside, through hundreds of births, easy ones and terrible ones, until the knowledge lives in her fingers rather than on any page. She knows how to turn a child that lies the wrong way, which herbs may ease a pain or slow a bleeding, the signs that mean all is well and the far quieter signs that mean it is not. She has almost certainly borne children herself. In a world with no hospitals, no trained surgeons at hand, no understanding whatsoever of the invisible causes of disease, this woman of pure, hard-won experience is the single most important person standing between a mother and death. There was even a body of written knowledge behind some of this, though few in the room could read it. Generations earlier, out of the great medical school at Salerno in southern Italy, had come a set of texts on the care of women, advice for pregnancy and childbirth, and the illnesses that followed, long linked to the name Trotula. That learning trickled outward across Europe, copied and translated, some of it reaching the more educated midwives and the households of the wealthy. Your village midwife may never have seen such a book, but she stood at the far end of a long chain of women's medical knowledge stretching back centuries, and that is not nothing. Now watch what she does as your pains deepen, because her tools are not the ones you would expect. She reaches first for prayer, and for something laid carefully across your body, an object that matters more than any blade or potion. It is a long, narrow strip of parchment, sometimes many feet in length, covered edge to edge in holy words and prayers and sacred symbols. This is a birth girdle. And here is a detail that tells you so much about this world. Many of these girdles did not belong to the family at all. They were kept by monasteries and churches, precious things, lent out and carried to the bedside of a woman in labour like a borrowed relic, then returned to be used again by the next and the next. Surviving examples still exist, worn soft and stained along their length, precisely where they were wrapped again and again around straining, labouring bellies. The girdle is unrolled now and laid across you, and as it touches your skin, the women begin to pray, above all, to one particular saint, Margaret, Saint Margaret of Antioch, the patron and protector of women in childbirth, and her story is the reason she is here. In the legend, Margaret was swallowed whole by a dragon, and then burst out from inside the beast, alive and unharmed, and to the medieval mind that image of bursting safely out of a body of darkness was exactly, powerfully, what every woman in this room was praying for. Her life was read aloud at bedsides. Her name was stitched into the girdles. In your world, faith is not a comfort layered on top of the medicine. Faith is the medicine sitting side by side with the midwife's hands, and no one here would think to separate the two. And when the moment comes, you do not lie down. That is another thing the modern picture gets wrong. In that flat, bright, reclining pose we imagine, medieval women very often did not give birth at all. Instead there is the birthing stool, a sturdy wooden seat, low to the ground, with a wide crescent cut out of the front, so that the midwife can reach and the child has a clear way into the world, and it lets you labour upright, sitting, squatting, working with the weight of your own body and the pull of the earth rather than against them. If there is no such stool, another woman simply sits behind you and becomes the chair, holding you upright in her own lap, because you are never, ever alone. All around you are the other women, the neighbours and the kinswomen and the friends, and there is an old, warm word for them, the gossips. Long before that word soured into something small and unkind, a gossip was a god-sibling, a woman bound to you in spirit, and these were the women who gathered at a birth. They hold your hands, they wipe your face, they pray, they encourage, they tell you of their own births, they hold you up when your strength gives out. This is not a lonely medical procedure, it is a gathering, an ordeal faced by a circle of women shoulder to shoulder, and their presence is its own kind of strength. And now let me give you the number, because it is the cold heart of this entire story. For any single birth, the risk that the mother would die was, as far as historians can reconstruct it, somewhere in the range of 1 to 2 in every 100. Say it quickly and it sounds almost survivable. But you must not stop there, because a medieval woman did not give birth once. Marriage came young, there was no reliable way to prevent it, and children came again and again across the fertile years, so that 8, 10, a dozen births was ordinary, unremarkable, expected. And when you take that small per-birth risk and roll the dice not once but 10 times, the numbers turn quietly monstrous. Death in childbirth was, across those years, one of the very likeliest ways for a grown woman simply to die. Every mother you passed in the street had walked through that door and survived it, and every one of them knew, in a plain, unspoken way, that any of the next times might be the last. And then there were the children themselves. Here I have to be careful and honest with you, because the numbers are heavy. Of the babies born in this room and rooms like it, a terrible share would not live to grow up. In many places, something close to half of all children died before adulthood, carried off by illness and hunger, and the plain fragility of small bodies in a world with no medicine to save them. And this is exactly where a cruel and popular myth needs to be broken, right here, cleanly. You may have heard it said that because so many children died, medieval parents somehow did not let themselves love them, held them at arm's length, grieved less. It is not true. We know it is not true, and we know it from the evidence itself. Historians such as Barbara Hannawalt have gone deep into the dry records of the English coroners, the official inquests into sudden and accidental deaths, and there, between the cold legal lines, the love shows through unmistakably. You find mothers who died trying to pull a child from a fire or a well. You find the exact tender detail of where a baby lay in its cradle when tragedy struck. You find, in chronicles and letters, parents utterly broken by the loss of a son or a daughter, grief written plainly across the centuries. High infant mortality did not make these people cold. It made them people who loved their children, knowing, with a clear and constant ache, how easily those children could be taken. That is not less love than yours. In many ways it is a heavier one. So now, with all of that around you, let me hand you the promised turn, the thing that reveals what this whole world was truly built upon. I told you the midwife had no medical degree, no university learning, that her power came only from her experience. That is true, but she carried something no physician in Christendom possessed, and it changes everything you thought you understood about her. She carried a license, not from a doctor, not from a guild of surgeons, from the church itself. And the reason why tells you, in a single stroke, exactly what mattered most in this world. In the belief of your age, a child who died unbaptized was a soul in the gravest peril, shut out from heaven through no fault of its own. And in the desperate case, when a baby was being born but was plainly not going to live, and no priest could reach the bedside in time, someone had to be able to act. The midwife. She alone in that sealed room was granted the sacred authority to baptize a dying infant with her own hands and a few drops of water in the last moments of its brief life, and so to save its soul when its body could not be saved. That is why the church examined her, approved her, licensed her. Not to guard the mother's body, but to guard the child's soul. Sit with what that means. In this world, the most important thing a midwife could do was not always to save a life. It was, when a life could not be saved, to secure an eternity. Faith did not sit beside the medicine here. Faith stood over it, and it followed the mother even after the danger had passed. Suppose the birth goes well, the child lives, the mother lives, the girdle is rolled up and sent back to the monastery. Even then she is not simply finished. For roughly 40 days she keeps to a time of rest and seclusion, and at the end of it comes a small ceremony that closes the whole passage. She goes back to the church. Kneeling at the door or within, she gives thanks for her survival and is formally welcomed back into the full life of the community. This was called churching, and if 40 days rings some distant bell for you, it should, because you are closer to this world than you feel. Across many cultures still today, a new mother is given a stretch of weeks, very often around that same 40, set apart to rest, to heal, to be cared for before she rejoins ordinary life. The customs have different names and faiths behind them, but the deep old shape of the thing, the sacred, bounded time after a birth, still echoes across the centuries from rooms exactly like this one. And now, at the very end, the twist I promised you, and it comes in 2 blows. Here is the first. You may be wondering about the operation we now think of as a way to bring a child safely into the world, the caesarean. It existed, in a sense, but steel yourself, because its meaning was the opposite of what you know. In this age, a caesarean was almost never an attempt to save the mother. It was performed only when she was already dead, or so plainly dying she could not be saved, and its single purpose was to reach the child in time to baptize it, to save that one small soul from being buried unbaptized inside her. It was not the beginning of a life-saving surgery. It was a last, desperate act of faith performed over a death. And here is the second blow, the one I asked you to hold on to from the start. You would assume, wouldn't you, that everything got better from here, that as the centuries turned and real physicians, learned men, trained surgeons took charge of birth, mothers grew safer. For a long and terrible stretch of time, the exact reverse was true. When the grand lying-in hospitals opened their doors in the 17 and 1800s, staffed by educated doctors moving from patient to patient, from the dissecting room to the delivery bed and back, women began to die in them in appalling numbers, cut down by a raging fever after childbirth. And the cause, unknown for decades, was the doctors themselves carrying invisible death on their own unwashed hands from one body to the next. It took until a physician named Ignaz Semmelweis in the 1840s proved that if doctors would simply wash their hands, mothers would stop dying, and even then his own colleagues mocked and rejected him. Think about what that means for the woman in our dark little room. Her midwife, with no theory of disease at all, who worked at farmhouse and cottage rather than in a crowded ward of shared infection, who often washed simply out of decency and custom, was in cold, plain fact frequently safer than the learned, celebrated, hand-borne pestilence of the doctors who came 400 years after her. The truly safe hospital birth, the one we now take for granted, is not the triumph of the old world over this one. It is an achievement of the 20th century and of little else before it. So let go, finally, of the picture you were given of a grim, backward, uncaring age. What was actually here, in this sealed and shadowed room, was a circle of women, a midwife whose whole life was written into her hands, neighbours who came to hold and to pray, a borrowed strip of parchment carried from a monastery and laid across a straining body like a shield, a saint called upon to burst her safely out of the dark. And at the centre of it, a woman doing the single bravest, most ordinary, most repeated thing her world asked of her, walking through that door again, and again, and again, knowing exactly what it might cost, and doing it anyway. This is history, told as best the records allow, and not medical advice, but the truth of it needs no exaggeration. Strip away the darkness and the dragons and the fear, and what remains in that little candlelit room is not weakness and not ignorance. It is a quiet, unbreakable strength, passed from woman to woman across 1,000 years, holding a hand, wiping a face, whispering a prayer, and refusing, through all of it, to let anyone face the door alone.